balance, fulfillment, and joy. I'm Kayla Sweet, and together we're going to have fun and create change from the inside out. I'm so glad you're here.
Hello, friends. Welcome back. We are back with Emily today for our second episode of our four-part series, exploring the heroine's journey. And I have so much anticipation right now. Like,
Me too.
the first episode was so good, and I'm like equally curious and excited about what is going to take place in our conversation today. So, welcome back, Emily. I'm so excited to just dive right back into this and really get into it. We're going to be covering three stages today. And before we get started, I would just love to check in with you. How are you feeling? Is there anything that you want to share before we start exploring again?
Yes, I'm so excited. I feel like I'm bursting at the seams to talk about this with you. And as we were talking about a little bit before we started recording, I'm also deep within my own work right now. And, I'm right alongside us as we go through these different stages. And so there's a tenderness here. There's some emotion that feels like it's just beneath the surface. I'm curious if it will come out today. I'm not sure, but I'll welcome it if it does. And yeah, I feel in my body just this bubbling up, this effervescence that is just so excited to and curious. Like, what are we gonna do today? How are we gonna, what's gonna come out? And I'm just really excited about that. It feels like very playful and adventurous.
Yes, I am mirroring all of that. Like, what is going to happen?
Guess we'll find out.
Yeah, we're in it. I would love to hear a little bit from you before we start and dive into stage three. We had talked a little bit as we were preparing for this about some recent information you had come across that was changing the way you were relating to the heroine's journey versus the hero's journey. And I just think that would be a good place to kind of start and open up this concept with a new invitation to think about things even differently than we had introduced it before.
Yeah, happy to. So, as we talked about in the last episode, learning about the hero's journey was incredibly helpful for me because I did see myself in a lot of the mythic phases that happen within the hero's journey. And just as I was excited to find the heroine's journey because I felt like it represented an aspect that wasn't fully discussed in the hero's journey, I also found myself thinking during that time, I think everybody needs to hear about the heroine's journey. Like, this isn't just a woman's quest for wholeness. This is like a spiritual and psychological quest for wholeness for all of us. And recently, I came across a podcast episode with Rob Bell, and I'm blanking on his guest name, but she was the one that brought the heroine's journey onto his podcast, and she related it as like the hero's journey being the masculine outward facing journey that we go through, something that represents the actions and the evolution of our actions and our behaviors from the outside. And the heroine's journey being that feminine, internal, psychological, and spiritual process that happens from the inside. And that really clicked for me. That helped me reconcile this desire to have both the hero and the heroine's journey within myself, representing my own journey, and then also making this accessible to everybody, regardless of gender or socialization around gender, that the heroine's journey and the hero's journey are both relevant and they both have their place in our quest for wholeness.
Yes, you perfectly summarized that as I knew you would. When you brought this to me before the episode, I felt so complete. Like that sense of working towards wholeness, we really need both sides. It's two sides of the same coin. It's two parts of the same journey, this internal feminine and masculine that we are all seeking to try to find a healthy balance of. And to think of it that way, it really shifted things for me and clicked, as you said. So I think that that's something that is just a useful context to hold as we dive into these additional stages today, and just really thinking about this as that internal psychological spiritual journey that we all have to embark on at some point in our healing and in our evolution as we navigate these messy human lives.
Exactly.
So I think we should just go ahead and dive right in.
Let's do it.
We did stage 1 and stage 2 last time, so that brings us to stage 3 as our starting point. This is the road of trials, meeting our ogres and dragons. I would love to hear some of your summaries or thoughts on what this journey really represents.
Yeah, so this is where we're gonna find those aspects of the heroine's journey that mirrors the hero's journey really well here. And this is where, they're out there and they're meeting all of these challenges, the mythic ogres and dragons. They're the things on the external plane that they're having to meet and navigate and figure out how to get past. But also these ogres and dragons exist within ourselves as well. And this is, there's this kind of interplay between the challenges that we're experiencing on the inside being represented in the dramas and the challenges that we're experiencing on the outside. And so this is really about us facing those challenges and confronting those illusions and testing our resolve and our commitment to our journey. And as I mentioned, these are those internal conflicts and the external obstacles, and there's this sense of needing to overcome them. It's a mountain to be climbed. There's like this stamina that is built in this stage that is needed for what's to come.
I love that framing of it as, building up our strength and our stamina,
Yeah.
and also that recognition of these challenges, these dragons and ogres, they are happening around us in our world, and they're also happening within us. And I think especially being conditioned in a Western modern world, there's a lot of internal ogres that we have to face.
So many.
And and there was a poem in this chapter of the book that really called to me at the time that I read it. And as I was revisiting it in preparation for this, I just knew I would need to share it today. So before we dive into kind of how to work through this stage, I just want to share this poem. It's by Erica Jong, and it's called The Myth of Female Inferiority. And I think we can relate to this as also the myth of feminine inferiority, because as Emily said, this is something that exists in all of us. So I'm just going to share this really quick. The best slave does not need to be beaten. She beats herself. Not with a leather whip or with sticks or twigs, not with a blackjack or a billy club, but with the fine whip of her own tongue, the subtle beating of her mind against her mind. For who can hate her half so well as she hates herself? And who can match the finesse of her self-abuse? Years of training are required for this. And the reason I love this poem so much, it's deeply painful. It echoes so many of the challenges that many of us go through. But that final part, years of training are required for this. It really highlights how our world conditions us to be our own worst enemy. And I think a lot of that comes up in this stage. So I wanted to share that as we get started.
Yeah, that poem really resonated for me the first time I read it, and it's resonating in a whole different layer today. So I'm really glad you brought that in.
So digging deeper, this is the stage that we confront these things and we build strength and we build stamina. And it's incredibly challenging. It's incredibly hard. It requires so much resilience. So how do we work through this stage? Emily, I would love to hear some of your initial thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really sticks out for me is self-inquiry and building self-awareness through this stage. Because, we talked about those external obstacles and the internal illusions and delusions and the ways that we self-harm with our own mind. Building self-awareness around all of those patterns, like what are your unique patterns around confronting challenges, building resilience, and in motivating yourself, because I think many of us are taught to motivate ourselves through shame and comparison and guilt. And so noticing your own patterns around that, if that's something that is present for you, and really recognizing that for what it is, that it's programming, it's conditioning, and try to see beyond those surface appearances of things, like digging deeper, asking the questions that are going to help you peel back the layers of your own patterning, your own programming, your own conditioned beliefs around who you need to be and how you need to act in order to participate in this world. And in that, cultivating some inner strength and perseverance to help you navigate the challenges that are to come, because there are many to come. And you added this to the notes this morning, and I'm so glad you did, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately around the quality of patience. And this quote from page 61 in the book: when the transformation of the heroine really occurs, however, it is usually the result not of rescue from without, but of strenuous growth and development within and over a long period of time. And that hit me this morning in a whole different way, because I know, you and I have talked a lot about like internal family systems, and I have a lot of little girl parts who just want to be rescued, who just want to be taken out of this really hard thing. And I love those little parts of me. And I've also learned that strenuous growth, that the development from within that comes from being in these really hard places, these crucible moments over a long period of time, they ripen me. They give me the resources to, I don't even want to say rescue myself, but to be with what I would want to be rescued from in a way that's solid on my own 2 feet. And that can only come from having patience and cultivating that inner strength and that perseverance to confront these external challenges and the internal ogres and dragons that we must face. And it's a critical part of the ripening process that can't be skipped. And when I was younger, I think I had my spiritual awakening before I had my descent to soul, which we will talk about in later stages. But I think some part of me thought, oh, like the hard work has already been done. And now I have this awakening, and I know that, I have I know that I'm a part of the universe, and, there's this unitive consciousness that comes from that. And that's great. And now I'm done. And
If only it were that easy.
If only, yeah. But the ripening and the maturation that comes from this part is so important. I have so much faith in it. And I want to stress that we don't rush this part of the process because it hurts. We want to get the lesson, get the learning, figure out what I'm meant to learn in this so that I can get out of it and never feel this pain again. But this is where we become. And I want to stress that this deserves our patience.
Yes. And it's interesting. I have a lot arising in me just listening to you and your reflections, because not only do we not want to rush it when we come to it the first or the second or the third time, but to learn to welcome it when it re-arises, because
Yeah.
as we mentioned in the first episode, all of these stages are cyclical, and we re-engage with them at different points of our life over and over. So we never get to a point where there are no more ogres and dragons, there are no more challenges or conflicts, there are no more fears and insecurities. There are always just waiting for the next level deeper, the next level of development, the next level of recognition. And I've felt that so much. I know we've talked, and I've had a challenging week. And I thought it was so interesting how you talked about the parallel between internal family systems here, because I have found that this week, as I've been really relearning to sit with very challenging emotions and situations and trying to be present with them and feel all of that, I have also been really tending to those little girls inside of me, like their desire to be in fantasy and to read and to imagine and to dream and to rest and to play. And that has kind of allowed me to do both, like feel both so much grief and sadness and so much like lightness and nourishment within the same day, within the
Mm,
same week.
mhm.
And as these new challenges come up, I'm constantly faced with a deeper level of depth and ability to seek wholeness within it. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What I'm hearing in that is that you have more capacity to sit with complexity, and the polarities are more integrated. They aren't, there isn't as much tension between the polarities, that you're able to be with them together. And we can get into that. That's a whole other episode when we talk about like psycho-spiritual or psychological development and complexity of the mind as a marker of psychological development. But that's what that sounds like to me. And the more turns you have around the heroine's journey, the more ripening you have, the more you are able to sit in the nuance and not be pulled apart in the tension of it. You can actually hold it with some
Yes,
space. That's another thing
right.
that you said earlier, that you have space around it. It's not, there's breathing room around all of it.
And I think that's really where the beauty is in all of the stages we're going to cover today, because none of these are easy. No single stage has any amount of ease necessarily. But within that challenge, there is such a gift and such an opportunity. And it's just an invitation to learn to be with the challenge, be with the conflict and all of these dragons. We don't necessarily have to tame them, or
Mhm, mhm.
we can befriend them or even just sit beside them and coexist.
It's so funny that you say that, because as you were sharing, I was kind of having these like cultural motifs going through my mind, where the hero slays the dragon, but it's almost always where the heroine's like, no, wait, what if I approach it with like a gentle hand out? And maybe the
Mhm.
dragon is just, hurting or something. Like the feminine tends to have a more receptive and curious position towards the dragons and the ogres, where they're wanting to know what's motivating the dragon or the ogre to be the way that it is in the first place. And maybe if I sit with it, I can learn something about it, and we can form at least a rough alliance with each other. And as opposed to the hero who goes in to slay without really thinking twice about it.
Yes.
So I think that leads us into some of the challenges. Like we've already been talking a little bit about this, but maybe you can share a little bit, Kayla, about the challenges that present. And I'm also really curious, because I know you do a lot of work with women in burnout. I'm curious if you could, kind of elaborate on some of these challenges and how they eventually lead to or show up in burnout.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up, because as I was preparing for this, I was thinking about not only my own journey through this, but the journey I've witnessed in so many other women and the ways that they've, tried to grapple with all of these things. So,
Yeah.
some of the challenges that might show up here for people as they're facing these internal and external conflicts, are really those inner demons. So, and I kind of opened with that with the poem, but there's these conflicts and fears and insecurities that come up internally as well as externally. And there's also like this play around what are the external ogres and what are we like projecting from within ourselves onto the
Mm-hmm.
world around us
Mm-hmm.
and placing blame there. So it's definitely both and some of the ways that these manifests are in that self-doubt, in that self-hate, in that shame. And one of the ways that I have seen this in myself and have seen this in my clients working through burnout is the shame around having needs,
Mm-hmm.
the shame around asking for support, the shame around drawing boundaries. There is a point where we realize our needs aren't being met and we're exhausted and we're depleted and we're feeling this self-doubt and this confusion, or maybe the paralysis, like just even moving forward feels hard and there's just a stuckness and a stagnation. And we have to realize that one, our needs are healthy and natural, and two, that they are requiring fulfillment, that we cannot continue without coming to terms with the fact that we can give ourselves permission to meet those needs and that we have to, as part of our journey, that it will not end well if we don't. And that's where I think we see a lot of that exhaustion, that burnout, because it's like we've both been conditioned and internally like gone along with this narrative that we can ignore our own needs and be okay. Like we're strong enough to face it and we can protect the rest of the world from what we are capable of or what we need or what would nourish us, because we are going to show up as whatever is needed for everybody and everything else. And it's just not sustainable. And there are so many stories around this. And I think the statement I hear the most from my clients is, I can't. I can't take time for myself, not even 15 minutes. There are people that need me. There are things that need to be done. And this is the demon, this is the ogre, this is the conflict. It's this story that has been conditioned into us and that we have adopted as our own, that tells us we don't get to have our own needs, or that they are less important than the things going on around us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what's really present for me in hearing all of that is that it's important to acknowledge how we've been conditioned to this and where we have decided to collude with the oppressor on this,
Yes.
where we have chosen that actually, yeah, they're right. I don't deserve to have these things. And I'm going to continue to be committed to that being the truth by being too busy to give myself these things or to ask for them. And so there's a little bit of self-responsibility that needs to be taken here, that we need to acknowledge the conditioning. Yeah, we can feel our feelings around society betraying us in that way, which we'll get to in later stages. But there's also an element of just like the poem, of your mind against your own mind. So where can you start to take responsibility for that? For what you are participating in your own self-abandonment.
Yes. And I think that's the hardest part,
Oh
because
gosh.
we don't we don't always realize that we are doing it. Like so much of it is happening under the level of consciousness. It just seems like it is what it is. Like it seems like reality. We are so like thoroughly convinced that there's not another way, that it feels very stifling and suffocating, and like there is no way to move out of it. And so it really takes a lot of strength and empowerment and like coming apart to push back against that and claim our ownership of our own experience. Do you have any other things that you would want to share about just the challenges that show up for people within this stage?
Yeah, so this is where, and we're going to get into this a little bit in the next stage too, but this is where we start to get illusions of success, where we've successfully slayed some dragons. We're meeting our own internalized imposters and all of those things, and we're starting to make some ground in the masculine world. We're getting some success. We're getting the degrees. We're getting the promotions. We're getting the recognitions and the things that matter. And so that the allure of that external validation starts to lead the heroine to pursue goals or paths that may not actually be aligned with her true purpose or her values. She's still seeking that external validation and worthiness. And so we're going to get into that in the next stage, but that's where this starts to take root and starts to happen. As we slay dragons and internally and externally, we start to get recognized and celebrated for that. And then that recognition and celebration can become very seductive.
Mm.
And you added a quote from the book that I would love for you to read here, because I think this goes so well into the next stage.
Yes, absolutely. So the reason I pulled this out is because it just echoes so much of, I think, especially for those of us who are in Western society and all of the inequities that exist there. There's this double narrative we get sold, and it is one of the challenges we have to overcome to kind of reconcile our relationship with this. So this is the quote. The most challenging dragon of all, however, is the societal reptile that smiles and says, "Yes, dear, you can do anything you want to do," while continuing to sabotage her progress with few opportunities, low salaries, inadequate childcare, and slow promotions. What this dragon really means is, yes, dear, you can do anything you want to do as long as you do what we want you to do. So it's this like, this double narrative we're getting sold, where on one hand, we're being told, be authentic and chase your dreams and all of these beautiful stories that are pushed, but then we're faced with the reality of inequity and challenge, and it's very confusing. It's very stifling. It makes you wonder if it's you, like, am I the problem?
I think this is an important place to note that the further away you are from the dominant culture in terms of your identities, like anyone who's not white, cisgendered, masculine, middle class, educated, able, all of those dominant paradigms, the further away you are from that in your identity, the worse this programming and this messaging actually shows up for you.
Yes.
Yeah, the sabotage becomes even more covert and nasty.
So
Kayla, how do we work with this? What are some tools and practices we can use to support us in this stage?
there are so many things that we can do in all of these stages. And I also think that, honestly, most of the tools and practices that are helpful at any stage are probably helpful at all of them. But one that came up for me as I was thinking through this in my own journey with it is doing shadow work and really trying to bring some awareness into those unconscious things and understanding the way that we project our challenges and our insecurities and our fears onto others around us and onto the world. It's really that ownership piece, right? But if we don't know that stuff is there beneath the surface of our own beliefs, if we've repressed these things and pushed them down, whether that's our own needs or our own strength or our own desires, whatever it is that's down there, if we haven't brought it to the light, if we haven't really tried to work through it and work with it and understand how the things that we won't own in ourselves, we project into the world, we can't really make much progress forward. And that was even, what you had talked about as far as how do you work through this stage, and it's self-awareness. And I think when you dig into shadow work and some of the practices that are around that, around bringing light to the things you've repressed and denied within yourself, a lot of self-awareness comes from that. So that is something that I think could be really powerful and could be an episode of its own. If you haven't delved into this, Google shadow work and start an exploration, and maybe we'll revisit that later. But
yeah, it's pretty amazing once we understand the psychic mechanism that is projection. Everything outside of us becomes an ally for our self-discovery and our awakening. It's all a mirror. It's all just showing us who we are.
yes.
And that can be both frustrating and so incredibly fun.
Yes. And liberating, right? It helps you
yeah.
realize, like, Yeah, that you have so much more influence on your experience than you realize, even within all of the challenges and inequities. There's always both, but
Mhm.
what are some other tools and practices that you would suggest in this stage?
Well, therapy for sure. And I, like we were talking about earlier, I have found internal family systems work to be incredibly helpful for me in this process, as well as somatic experiencing. Those two paired together have been really, really amazing for me. So they help us explore and address some of those underlying issues that surface during the challenging times. While we're slaying these dragons and ogres, things from our past can come up, patterns can come up, and therapy provides a place for us to process all of that. And also helps us see how I think therapy, when done right, and especially internal family systems, just because of the nature of that kind of therapy, it really helps us learn to love and appreciate our internal dragons and
Mm,
ogres, because we don't want to slay those parts of us on the inside. This is really a practice of wholeness, and wholeness doesn't mean we amputate the parts of us that are dark or that we don't like. It means we embrace it all. And internal family systems is so holistic in that way and so gentle and kind that I think it really helps with the shame that we were talking about earlier, and the guilt and the grief that comes when we realize that we've been self-abandoning, or that this, society has duped us and, made this double-edged sword promise that we talked about earlier. So therapy is really great. And any kind of creative expression that serves as some sort of cathartic outlet, as well as a means of self-discovery. So for me, that's dance. I love
mm,
dancing. And for a long time, I only danced by myself in my office. And then over the years, I've explored going into conscious dance communities such as Five Rhythms. And that has been amazing for me. But it's different for everybody. Whatever that thing that feels like it's going to allow you to have that catharsis, that self-expression and self-discovery. Yeah, that's your thing. Do that.
yeah. Creative expression is a great way to work with that self-awareness and that healing and that shadow too. I think a lot of the work that I've done around this, I've created something because it just
Mhm.
feels good to move it from inside of you into expression in the world when you're working through all of this complex stuff.
I've seen some of your work that has come from this work. Your pastels, oh my gosh, it's amazing, the work, the art that you create from this space, Kayla. So yeah, find your thing.
Yes. Yeah, whatever feels good and feels fun. And I think it's also a good chance to like bring in that the parts work as well as with our inner child and the part of us that could create and play and dance without that
Yeah.
shame, because that part of us is still in there somewhere and we just have to regain access to them and show them that it's safe now to
Yeah.
emerge.
When we were kids, we acted this stuff out, when we were playing pretend, and we would pretend to be the ogres and the dragons. And it gave us this like little mini drama therapy space for us to act out these parts of us and to explore them in a way that was really silly and playful. And we've lost that as adults. And I think it's a really helpful place to bring that back in a space that feels safe for you. Like maybe you have a partner or a friend like you, Kayla, where we could, act out these little things and engage in something that feels a little bit more playful and silly and childlike to help us lighten the mood a little bit, because this work can feel really heavy.
Yes.
And yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I think unless there's anything else you want to add, I think we can move on to stage 4. I feel like we're
Yeah.
at like a perfect segue into the
Mhm.
next stage. Are you good with that?
I am, yes.
All right. So stage 4, this is the illusory boon of
Mm.
success. Oh my gosh. There's so much here.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel like this hits a little too real for me sometimes
I
because I
know.
feel like I'm constantly brushing up against this edge. What are some
Yes.
of the essential like
Yeah.
qualities that we see here?
Yeah. So at this stage, the heroine has learned to play the game of her conditioning. She's figuring out the quote unquote rules, and she's found some success in that. We had kind of alluded to that earlier. She's starting to get recognized. She's getting promoted. She's getting the degrees. She's getting noticed, and 30 under 30 from Forbes magazine kind of stuff. But ultimately, it feels empty, and the boon is not as abundant as she was promised.
Mm.
And there's a quote from the book that I really loved that I felt really just encapsulated this. During the road of trials, a woman transcends the limits of her conditioning. It is a particularly harrowing time and adventure fraught with fears, tears, and trauma. As a child and adolescent, she is shaped to fit a role determined by expectations of parents, teachers, and friends. And to move beyond them, she must flee the captors of her conditioning, leave the garden of protection behind, and slay the dragon of her dependencies and self-doubts. And it is a perilous journey. And yeah, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, just goosebumps all over my
Yeah,
body.
no. And the thing is with this stage, and this is why this is the illusory boon of success, and this is where we start to meet that double-edged sword that we were promised in the last stage, that no matter how successful she is, she has to deal with the fact that the outer world is still hostile to her choices. And this is where girl boss feminism is really running rampant. And it's under the delusion, and I want to underline that, the delusion that if she leans in enough, she will be enough. And ultimately, this stage is about meeting the reality that she won't be, because society and status quo is wanting her to be a certain way that is separate from her authentic self.
Yeah, it's like no matter how much she does the things that the world is telling her to do and follows the maps that have been given to her to a T and engages in the perfectionism and the achievement and all of that, it's never enough. It never feels like enough. The arrivals are so like temporary and fleeting. And something I wanted to add is that I think a big part of this is it's that illusion of arriving and how fleeting it is. It's when you get the promotion you've been working towards, or you get the degree, you have these milestones, and before you get to them, you tell yourself, when I get there, I'll have made it, or things will be better, or things will be easier, or I'll fit in, or whatever story it is we tell ourselves to keep us pushing towards these goals. And then we arrive, and there's maybe a momentary celebration of having achieved that thing, and then disorientation follows pretty quickly.
And then what?
Right.
Yeah.
You start to wonder, like, well, where have I arrived? And is this really where I wanted to go? And like, did I even have any say in this? And oh my goodness, it's so complicated.
Yeah, I'm as you were sharing that, I was just thinking I had made myself a goal that I was going to pay off my student loans, and I did, and I paid off my student loans, and then it was like, well, that was kind of anticlimactic. Like, did I, I did the thing because society tells me that having debt makes me a terrible person. And then now I did the thing, and I'm like, well, okay, now what?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I love this illusion of arriving. Some part of me had told myself that when I'm debt free, then what? I'll feel liberated, free. I don't know. And I arrived there, and arrived where? And yeah,
Mhm.
it's
Yeah, I feel like I grapple with this every time anything big happens, because it's like, okay, I got the degree. Okay, well then I have to get the next degree now. And like it's every arrival is anticlimactic, because you think it's going to be the thing. Even if you've done this work, it's still this like hidden narrative that's like just sneaks in unsuspecting ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is where the self-improvement project never ends. And like we see this a lot in our profession as coaches and learning and development professionals. Like we get the certification and then we get the next certification and then we get the next certification because all of these external accolades are going to protect us. Like it's like our suit of armor. This is what's going to, make me deserving and worthy. And this is how I'm going to fight the next layer of ogres and dragons. And we start to question, well, what is this really all for at this point?
It's that like constant seeking of, well, once I have this, then maybe people will believe I have the right to
Yeah,
be here.
right. Exactly. And even this, and there's a little hair that I want to split here, a little nuance that I even felt this way with my purpose work.
Mm.
I discovered purpose work, and like I said, I had my spiritual awakening before I had my descent to soul. And so I discovered all of this stuff, and I was like, oh, well, maybe I could bypass all that icky stuff by just discovering and living my purpose now in my mid-20s. And then it's all going to be okay. But even then, I was feeling like I was relating to my purpose work from this place that we're talking about here, where I felt like I had to embody and live my purpose and create outcomes from my purpose as rent for existing on this planet.
Mm.
Like it was still this external validation and worthiness and right to be here that I was using all of my spiritual work to demonstrate that I'm worthy of existing here. And that's where, like, that's the deeper roots of this part right here, is that we're still thinking that this next thing is going to make me feel like I deserve to be here and I have a right to be here.
And it's always the next thing. And I love that you brought up the way this exists within spiritual work, within like purpose work, within all of this, because I think this is the shadow side we see in these communities, really, really commonly, because I think a lot of people use it in that way unintentionally because we're seeking something to give us permission to belong here.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so Kayla, how does one work through this stage?
So there are so many things. Um, the kind of, I guess, expanding on even what we had already talked about when it comes to developing self-awareness and everything around that, there is a process of conscious examination that really needs to happen when it comes to your beliefs about success. What do you think success is? What stories are you telling yourself? What thing is it for you? What is the next thing that you're chasing that is going to earn you your worthiness or your belonging here? Those stories are so ingrained in us, and we so seldom take a step back to examine them and realize that these are beliefs, they are stories, they are thoughts, they're a product of our conditioning most often. And once we see them, we then have choice. We get to become self-authored. We get to write our own definitions. What does success actually mean to me, to my heart, to my soul? Like what do I want to define myself by? Rather than taking the definitions that have been handed to us, we have an opportunity to create something. And that's where like this purpose work that you talk about and like having a vision and understanding your values and doing all of that depth work really supports this process. And having a coach or a mentor or somebody else who's like going alongside you on the journey that you can talk to during this time, following books and podcasts that are aligned, those are all really useful tools because these are often unconscious. We need mirrors, we need people and things around us to help us make space and to see that which might not be in our conscious awareness just yet. And also because it's very disorienting. It's a very like disbalancing process where you just don't feel like you have anything to grab onto once some of these things start to fall away, and you're going to need support in that. So just really want to emphasize that.
Remember your guides and allies. You've been collecting guides and allies, so just remember that they're there for you.
And then I would love to hear some of your thoughts on how to work through this stage as well.
Kind of alluded to this earlier, but the masculine essence of a person is the part of them that helps them have drive and take action toward the things that they care about and the things they want to accomplish or create. And so the invitation here is to discover your patterns around doing and around action and resting, even, because that's a part of it. To kind of help you consciously work with this stage, and with, you know, the imbalance of this stage is the overdoing and the insatiability of accomplishment and activity and achievement that can happen here. And so just start to discern, what are your patterns around doing? How do you motivate yourself? How do you take action? And are there any places in that you could soften and be a little kinder and be a little gentler and examine the parts of you? Like I've got an inner toxic masculine part that I call the drill sergeant. And I've been working with that part for years. And we've gotten to a place now where we're I've actually kind of given him a new role, and he's now my chief operating officer. And so we have a monthly one-on-one where we talk about like the things that, that have gotten done and the things that still need to get done, and planning the action. And I'll go a little bit more into that in a bit, but yeah, like start to build some allyship with your inner masculine parts. And if there are any parts of you that need to be softened and to be healed, explore that. And this is where internal family systems therapy has been amazing for me in that.
I feel like my life changed when I learned about internal family systems therapy. It's like, oh my gosh, this just brings together like all of the different psychological wholeness things that I had been integrating and learning about in such a practical and healing and safe way to explore that. So I know we've already been talking a bit about the challenges and the things that come up in this stage. What are some of the really key things that people should be paying attention to as far as challenges that show up here?
Yeah, so just to put a finer point on some of the things we've already mentioned, basing your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-definition upon masculine standards of production. This is something that can really happen. And that inner relationship with the inner masculine is distorted and tyrannical. And, like he never lets you rest, and you feel oppressed, but don't understand the source of that victimization. So, exploring that inner dynamic. And as we mentioned, IFS therapy is helpful for that. This is also where perfectionism starts to take root, and you fall into this superwoman trap, this thinking that if I'm perfect and prepared, then I'll be safe, then I'll be happy, then I'll have enough. And this comes from watching our mothers, and the self-denigration and the self-hate kind of convinces us that we're not going to be anything like her. And in order to avoid feeling that way, I'm just going to be perfect instead. And that's, of course, not how it works. Perfection is not an end state that we can get to, and it's not a source of armor that we can rely upon. A couple other challenges is that she finds ways to numb herself, filling that pain of being estranged from your inner world and from the feminine essence with more activity, more accolades, more achievement. Yeah, it's just that insatiable doingness. And there was a quote from the book that I really loved for this section, where they talk about how I was carrying something that was too big for me to carry. I didn't learn the steps to be a hero, just how to pretend to be heroic. And that's where we get that the great pretender part. That is like, I've got it all together. I'm super, I could do it. I could do it all. I just need to do this and that. And like you get this activation of trying to be all things. And it's exhausting. You don't get your needs met, and you get exhausted from that pretending that you don't even have needs to begin with, or that other people's needs are more important to you, because we're programmed around selflessness as leaders, as moms, if that's something that we do, as partners, like all of that. Anything that you want to add to those?
Just this idea of the great pretender. When I first came across this, I was like, oh no,
Oh no,
this is me.
it's me.
I am the great pretender.
Uh-huh.
Um, because we were taught that if we fake it until we make it and we put on a face that we can achieve everything and we can be all things for all people and serve in all of the roles and all of the gaps, that will be enough somehow. That like if we just
Mhm.
pretend that we will somehow be met, like our needs will somehow magically be met by pretending. It doesn't make sense when you start to really think about it, but it's, I think, what we all are told by the world around us and all of this, just all of these narratives around what it is to be a good woman or
Mhm.
good
Yeah,
person. Like all these
good.
stories, yes, good is so toxic when we're trying so hard to be good and to be perfect. And we have this internal dialogue that's telling us, no, do more. Like the reason you don't feel right yet is because you haven't done enough yet. It's just so exhausting. And we talked about burnout before, and I think the great pretender like syndrome is a big part of that burnout because you aren't allowing what is authentic to you and your actual needs and desires to be seen or met or to even have them. You can divorce yourself even from the awareness of them. Sometimes when I start working with women, they don't even know what is missing, what they need, because they're disconnected from their bodies, they're disconnected from their
Mhm.
desires. Like they've learned to survive to cut themselves off from all of that.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness.
I'm just like loving all of us right now for going through this.
I know it's a journey just talking about it. I'm
It
like,
is.
oof.
Oh, yeah. The edge is here. Eek.
Yes, always. What are some of the tools and practices as we're with all of
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
messiness, Emily? What are some of the things that are just really helpful to work through this and support ourselves through this?
All right, so I'm going to elaborate a little bit on the monthly one-on-one that I have with my chief operating officer, formerly the drill sergeant who I've let go on a vacation and then gave them a new title. Um, but I do this meeting monthly with my inner critic or the inner masculine tyrant, who's now I'm building a different relationship with. And I choose to do this at the end of my menstrual cycle in the luteal phase. And we'll talk about this another time when we talk about the psycho-spiritual process of the menstrual cycle. But at that point, my inner critic is the strongest, but I've also had enough ego development through the follicular and ovulation phases that I can meet my inner critic with some fortitude and stamina. So that's when I choose to do this, and you can choose to do this however you want. But essentially, I write down everything that I've accomplished for the month that I'm proud of, based on my standards of success that align with my own definition of what matters. And I use this as evidence for that inner critic part that I am actually doing enough. Like,
Mm,
look at everything that I've accomplished. This is amazing. And look how much action I'm taking towards what matters. Because again, that inner masculine is helping you orient your action and your drive to create the things that really matters. This is where the partnership between the masculine and the feminine really comes together, is bringing essence into form. And that's what the masculine is trying to help you do. And one of the ways that I have set some boundaries around this process is that I tell that part that I'm willing to hear feedback about my actions and my behaviors, the things that I'm doing, but I am not willing to hear criticisms on who I am as a person. And so I can sit with the inner critic saying, you said you were going to do this thing in order to get your program finished this month, but you actually did this. I'm okay with acknowledging and taking responsibility with where I didn't show up where I said I was going to show up. But I'm not okay with hearing my inner critic tell me that I'm a bad person because of it, or
mm.
that I don't deserve to feel happiness because of it. And so having those inner boundaries with your inner critic is something that has been really useful for me. And along those lines is part of wholeness is integrating all of these fragmented parts. of yourself, that you are all of these fragments and you are enough. And so I think of, when I'm feeling a certain way that I might want to push aside, like if I'm feeling afraid or lonely or angry or tired, and I feel that compulsion to go into doing and action mode because I've been programmed to activity my way out of suffering, that I'll instead pause and I'll say, I'm afraid, I'm lonely, I'm angry, I'm tired, and I am whole and enough. I don't have to do anything about it. So those are some of the two practices that have helped me. What about you, Kayla?
First, I just want to say I love the way that you engage the inner critic in such like a creative and like collaborative way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just such a beautiful practice to be able to align with all of those internal criticisms and then pull up those personally defined pieces that let you know what success actually means to you and to hold that up as a mirror to the inner critic and to be in conversation with the inner critic. It's just so beautiful. I love all of that. Some of the things that are useful for me within this stage is first off just having the courage to be limited, to be
Mm-hmm.
human, to not be a super woman, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
No
and
more
I,
pretending.
yes, yes, to let down the masks, let down all of the shields and the armor and the weapons and all of these things and just be vulnerable and raw and real and in the mess of it and okay with that. I think the integration affirmations that you shared are a perfect way to bring that into being. I am angry, I am exhausted, I am resentful, and I am whole. Like how beautiful. What a lovely way to just find courage in our limitations and not lean into shame when those things come up. Because I think
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy to just be incredibly hard on ourselves when things don't look or turn out the way we wanted them to. So just having the courage to be human is hard. So that's that's one thing. Another thing that I've done off and on, and this isn't for everyone, I just thought it was a good place to mention it because in different parts of my journey, when I've really grappled with this stage, has been to either read or write poetry. And it could be music, it could be any kind of creative expression, kind of similar to the last stage. But for me, when I've come into dialogue with poetry, there's a transcendence to the way that poetry is written that holds space for paradox and allows like the processing of desires and aching and longing and all of these things that come up in this stage. And it makes you feel seen when you read a poet's experience and you know it and you feel it and you feel recognized. And then taking that a step further, if you are somebody that likes to write, or even if you don't like to, just playing with this poetry and using word or even just journaling around the paradox of our human existence can be integrative. It's just
Mm-hmm.
another way to kind of work through all of these conflicting stories and beliefs and try to figure out where we are within all of that.
I'm so glad you mentioned this. And poetry for me started to really show up in the next couple stages where I think you said it beautifully about holding space for paradox and also giving beautiful voice to those aching desires and the longing. And for me in this process of death and the descent to soul that happened for me, that was triggered by my father dying, you sent me a poetry book from Rilke called The Dark Interval. And that book alone, I swear, got me through that process because it helped me see the space between a little with more, it was luminescent. It was like the liminal space that I was in became alive through poetry. And having a place for someone who had been through it before to speak about it was such poignancy and depth and meaning that reflected the depth of the processing that I was going through. I couldn't process in words in that way, but to read it helped me feel seen and gave substance to what I was experiencing in a really, really important way. And so I'm so glad that you brought this up. Poetry is going to be on the list of tools for until the end of this podcast series.
It is medicine. I feel like anytime there's something that I don't have the words for, I find it in a poem. Like there is a poem out there that can bring to light this challenge. So wow, we've covered so much already. We have one more stage for today. And that I feel like was a perfect segue into it as you were talking about some of the challenges you've experienced. Stage 5 is awakening to feelings of spiritual aridity and death. This is like the little deaths, the loss that happens along the way. And I would love to hear just some of the qualities and just things that happen in this stage for people. How do they know that this might be something they're grappling with?
So we've kind of been building up to this, right? You know, the heroine's been questioning. She's been doing all the things that she was told she needed to do. And they started to feel empty, but she kept playing the game by the rules that she was given. And it's at this stage that she realizes that the game was duped from the beginning. And you feel a deep sense of soul loss. And like there's this sense of betrayal that you were duped and you played by the rules that society gave you, and it still feels empty. And we've come to this point where we've realized it's all a ruse. And now we're in uncharted territory because there are no rules for this space. And this radical uncertainty initiates the underworld journey and that process of psycho-spiritual death. And it is an appointment with your soul. And I have so much faith in this process because of my own experience in it. And that radical uncertainty, I would love to share a little bit of a story, if it's okay, if we have time. It's short. But when my dad was in his dying process, it took about 4 months from the time that he got sick to the time that he passed. And in that process, I was in this radical uncertainty and I was trying to continue to play the game. But something about losing, in my experience, it was a parent. So losing someone really important to you. And he was my father. So he was the proverbial patriarch of, my life. This was where a lot of my programming came from. And he was dying and we were separating. And the radical uncertainty of that time, I kept having this image in my mind where I felt like I was walking through a wooded meadow of some sort or on a trail in the woods. And this feeling that something came up from behind me and grabbed me at the ankles and then yanked me back and was like dragging me back with my face down in the dirt. And I was like reaching for roots and branches and rocks and like anything that could help me stay oriented to this time and this place. And we could say metaphorically, those were like, I was reaching for all of the things that I used to do that used to help me get through things, like over planning and using sticky notes to project manage my dad's death. That's a whole thing. But, I was reaching for all of these familiar things and they did not measure up. They did not prevent me from being abducted into the underworld, which was what that experience was like. And that radical uncertainty was an abduction to a very deep place. And we're going to get to that in the next episode. But this is what, it literally felt like I was dying. And I want to just normalize that. If anyone is experiencing this, that death is such an important part of this purpose work journey. And in my experience, it had to be viscerally represented in my external world in order for me to surrender to that abduction of the psycho-spiritual death of the quote unquote father's daughter, the patriarchy's daughter. Like that part of me needed to die along with my father in order for me to get the message. And maybe it's not like that for everybody else, but that's what it had to do for me. I had to be able to let go of my identity as quote unquote his daughter in order to become who I was meant to be. And this was the beginning of the cocoon stages that we talk about in purpose, where the caterpillar is literally unbecoming. It is no longer itself. It's sticky, icky goo with these imaginal cells that seem to know that it's going to turn into a butterfly, but it's got to be in this really icky stage first, where everything's dark and undone, and you cannot bypass this stage. And it is disorienting. It does feel like a liminal space between worlds. And it's painful, it's scary, it's uncertain. It's also so beautiful and alive. Like this time of my life, I never felt more alive than when I was unbecoming alongside my dad. And it's kind of weird to say, but that was the most spiritual experience that I had and the deepest ripening experience that I had. And I just have so much faith for this part of the journey. And I believe that it's worth it. It's necessary. And finding people who can hold space for you as you are unbecoming is critical. And you were one of those people for me, and you knew exactly the kinds of things that I needed. You sent me these cards and that I used every day to help me get through this in this poetry book. And so finding those people that can be with you in the unbecoming without trying to rush you in your rebirth is incredibly important in this stage.
Yes. Thank you just for sharing a little bit about your experience with your dad and with yourself. I mean, that I remember when you were going through that time, and I just remember feeling so honored that you allowed me to witness it and you allowed yourself to be seen by me, because it was so raw, and I've never seen anyone take just grief and pain and transmute it in as beautiful of a way as I witnessed that within you. And that's what this stage does. It invites us. It invites us in if we are up for the task, if we're willing to sit with the grief and the pain and the uncertainty and the darkness and the unknown. Like, something beautiful can come again, but you can't rush it. You can't be impatient, and you can't be around people who are invalidating it or wanting you to just move along, get over it. It's uncomfortable for them to be around,
Yeah. And that's a reflection on them. It's not a reflection on you being wrong in your process. It's a reflection on their capacity to be with this part of wholeness.
Yes.
And so if you're finding yourself feeling invalidated by the people that you're around, then find other people to be around for now.
Yeah. And our society doesn't teach people well. I mean,
no.
no judgment on people who have trouble holding space for this stuff. The world doesn't teach us how to do
No.
it. We're all pretty ill-equipped.
Very emotion phobic over here in this society.
Oh, goodness. Okay. So we're in the death. We're having these little deaths. And I just had one thought I actually want to share before I move into how to work with this stage. And I had read this, I don't remember where, so I can't give proper credit for it, but it had talked about how when we see people that are dealing with like suicidal ideation, that sometimes part of that, I mean, there are clinical diagnoses and seek therapy if you're struggling with this, but sometimes part of that is this soul knowing, this deep knowing that part of you cannot go on in the same way. And we, without our initiation processes, mistake that for a physical death rather than a spiritual death, rather than an ego death, rather than a transformation that we can undertake. There's a confusion that happens because we don't have access to these tools readily available. And so getting that support and seeking that therapy and finding your way through it, there's so much wisdom in our pain, but we don't have a lot of access to those tools. It's not readily available. So I just thought that was really interesting.
I'm so glad you said that because yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me as well. And I also think that this is where we start to, knowing the psychic mechanism that is projection, we start to externalize this sorrow and this discontent and this lack of fulfillment. And this is where we might run into the territory of a quote unquote midlife crisis, where a person might feel compelled to blow up their life in some way, or have a very big sabotaging experience because they're trying to create as much separation from this life that is not authentic to them. And that is their soul. Like, this is an appointment with your soul, and your soul is saying, what is it going to take in order for you to have direction to go in the direction that we need to go? And sometimes it creates a really big rupture in a person's life as a way to create the space for this death and rebirth to happen.
Yes. Yes. Speaking of this like destruction and how sometimes it can show up, it shows up in different ways for different people and we interpret it differently. How do you work through this? How do you work through this stage? What are some things that we can do that come up?
Mm-hmm. This is where we really need to deconstruct the ways that we seek approval and validation and security from the masculine figures and institutions in our life. So, figuring out the ways that we play out the dramas with our father figures in work and school and family. And this, for me, this process started before my dad died. I had had a relationship where the person really, in a lot of ways, reminded me of my dad. And when we split up, I was confronting all of the ways that I was trying to get a corrective experience with him. I was trying to correct this deep disconnection that I had with my father, and that I was trying to like play out this drama in my life in order to get that corrective experience. And I needed to discover that for myself in a really painful way via a breakup. So that's one of the things that you might show up. This could show up as like, getting fired, or having a disagreement with your boss, or, maybe you were promised a promotion and then you were passed up by it, or you thought you were going to get a scholarship or some award through the patriarchal institutions that you're a part of, and then you were passed over. And so there's something that's going to happen that's going to help you see that you are still externalizing your approval and your validation and placing it somewhere outside of yourself. And that's going to trigger a sense of loss. And that loss is a yearning to reconnect with yourself, with the feminine, to receive care and to be nurtured, to find home within your body, within your community, to feel like you belong. And so as you're deconstructing, you're feeling all of those feelings, find ways to reconnect with your body and with community and with creation as a way of like kind of creating a little bit of a balm for the pain that's happening.
We can't overemphasize the need for both community and like body attunement during
Yeah.
all of this, because those are the things that we get disconnected from, or that we are not taught to just really integrate ourselves within in a way that is true and authentic and like honors our needs. So finding ways to reconnect with those is just so incredibly powerful. What are some of the other challenges that show up here? We've already kind of talked about this as we've been explaining what this stage looks like, but what are some other things that people can be on the lookout for as far as challenges in this stage?
Mm-hmm. Feeling really out of sync with yourself, getting sick easily, burning out, feeling empty after we accomplish goals, like we mentioned earlier, mysterious stomach issues, insomnia, mental health challenges. Like, this is where your body is screaming at you to pay attention, and there might be no medical reason for it. A lot of people experience that there's no physiological reason for you to be experiencing what you're experiencing. Your blood work comes back normal, but you can't help but feel like your body is crying from the inside out. And That's a telltale marker. Another is feeling a sense of like dryness, staleness, like sterileness. That's that spiritual aridity that, I kept having this vision when I was working for the government and this came in part from some feedback that someone gave me, that they felt like the government that we were working for was this stale building and there was a basement room and it had like fluorescent lights and like recirculated air and that me and my team, we were the learning and development team. And in my humble opinion, I believe that learning and development is like the soul and heart of an organization. And that they felt like our team was trying to build this like greenhouse jungle in this basement fluorescent room. And like we were working so hard putting plant lights up and spraying, the plants and watering them, making sure that they were flourishing. But we were working so hard. It was like we were trying to plant a rainforest in ground that was not fertile enough for it. And that was this recurring image that I had. And that was my feeling of, sterility. I was trying to create something heartful and beautiful in a place that it was not going to be nurtured. It was going to die on the vine. And there was a quote from the book that I loved representing this part, that a woman loses her inner fire when she is not being fed, when her soul's flame is no longer fueled, when the promise of the dream held for so long dies, and those old patterns no longer fit, and the new way is not yet clear, and there is darkness everywhere, and she cannot see or feel or taste or touch. Nothing means very much anymore, and she no longer knows who she really is. If you're feeling any sense of that, you're most likely in this stage. And then there's also the sense of feeling betrayed by God, especially if you grew up in a father religion of some sort. I don't have this in my background. I did not grow up in a religious family, and so I didn't have that extra layer of conditioning and programming that I needed to unwind from. But what I've heard from other people is that there's this sense of feeling betrayed by God, by the proverbial father. Like, I was the good girl, I did all the things, and I'm still not good enough and not feeling like I'm deserving of being here. I've been told that that's a challenge that shows up here too. What would you add to this?
First, I just want to say that quote that you shared, that was like, I had it like triple underlined in my book, and I just feel like it perfectly describes what this feels like, and that when those old patterns don't fit anymore, and when you don't know what the future looks like, it's just such an uncertain stage. And the question that arises for, I think, many of us when we're here, when we're either going through, the burnout or the life disruption or whatever comes with this stage, it's the question of what now? Like, I've done all of the things and here I am, and I don't know which way is up and I don't know the way forward. And the things that we thought we would be given when we got here weren't given, they weren't delivered, they weren't granted to us. And even if we've had some level of success in the definition of society's eyes, monetary or with particular roles or titles or positions, oftentimes this is where we realize that the cost was too high and that we have sacrificed, part of our heart and soul in the process. And we don't feel seen, we don't feel known, we feel isolated because while we've been pretending and achieving and perfecting, we've lost touch with who we really are, and we haven't then been able to generate like true authentic connections with others, because how can you when you don't even have access? How can you show that to the world? And so you just feel so incredibly alone.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I remember a very visceral experience of this where I was in a leadership training. This was in 2017, and I had a 360 done, those kinds of assessments where you self-assess, and then you have people give you feedback. And then you look at those two things compared to each other. And it was also my first experience with coaching. And as I looked at my 360 results and I saw how much effort I put into manufacturing belonging by borrowing the qualities of the people that I was around and wearing them like a mask, adding them to my great pretender persona, and that I was this, professional chameleon, so to speak. And I had no idea who I was. All of that manufactured belonging felt empty because none of it was based on who I was authentically and what mattered to me. And it was because I had no idea who I was. And so that for me was like this very visceral awakening, and realizing that in that self-abandonment, all these friendships that I had built up until this point, while some of them were enduring and everlasting, many of them started to fall away when I embarked on that journey of discovering who I am, like what my values were, what my vision was, and my purpose, and the things that mattered to me authentically. And so this is, that internal sense of isolation, that no one knows the real me. I don't even know the real me. This is a very real part of this stage.
Yeah, and everything that has to fall away with that, right? Like there's just so much grief. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's time to like try our best to wrap this up in some kind of way that is meaningful. So I would love to hear both some tools and practices, and also any just concluding thoughts from this stage and this entire conversation. Where are we at? How can we really practically use the knowledge of these stages, especially this one that we're on right now, and come into contact with it? What are the practices that can help us move through it?
Well, I'm going to bring up poetry again, since this was where it started to really land for me. So double down on poetry and creating things using your hands. This is where I think it's really important that we get our hands dirty in some way, some sort of tactile craft to create something, and reconnecting with your body and that feminine urge to create. It might be gardening or clay or painting. I loved pastels during this phase because I just liked that I can get my hands dirty with it. Some of that cathartic, emotive process of creation, and finding simple, easy ways to be fed spiritually and soulfully. And this is to those people who say, I don't have time. Like one song of moving music to move your body mindfully to, or 5 minutes in the garden to listen to the birds. Small, simple, easy ways for you to be reconnected with nature, with the universe, with the truth of what life is and offering you and who you are. And then this is where we get really good at saying no, or we, at least practice. I'm still learning.
Boundaries.
Yeah, boundaries. So say no and be with the feelings of mourning that come with that, because I know for me, saying no was hard because I had FOMO. I didn't want to miss out on anything. And so there was a part of me that like really had to check in. Is this something I really want, or am I just doing it because I don't want to be alone, or I don't want to miss out on something? And so saying no, and then being with those feelings of mourning that come from saying no, not this thing. And simultaneously the liberation that comes with that. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Saying no, just practice it. It's so powerful, and it's so complex because you're right. There is mourning, there is freedom, and there's also changes that happen in relationships when you start to say no. Like there's things that happen within yourself, and there are ways that boundaries rub up against other people and where they're out on their journeys. So there's just a lot here, and practicing it and being with all of it is so essential.
I'm going to quote my friend Meg on this one. No is a complete sentence.
Yes.
Yeah. And then this is when we stop doing, we need to learn how to be. So finding any practices of being that help you simply just be who you are. So this is maybe meditation. I really like, pure awareness or non-dual meditation for this kind of thing. But if meditation isn't your thing, this is also where conscious dance can be really useful, especially if you're just doing it by yourself at home, where you learn to be in your body, to be with the music, and to be in the flow of that conversation between your body and the rhythm of the music. So any practices around being. And this is going to be really helpful because the upcoming chaos that we're going to talk about in the next episode is going to require you to become familiar with holding the tension of the unknown while waiting for that next step to emerge. And these practices of being will help you develop the spiritual stamina to do so. Any
Yes.
other tools that you want to mention before I give my closing thoughts?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is just that as we are engaging with this and trying to reconnect with the body, this is a beautiful time to experiment with how you are treating the body and really trying to honor it as the temple that it is. I've done different cleanses where maybe you reduce sugar or you take a break from meat or you take a break from alcohol. Just honoring that our bodies sometimes need to be cleared out physically so that we can have space for this really hard work can be helpful because it's all connected. And when I went through a lot of this, I was working through like purpose work, and part of that was creating this really high level of intentionality about the physical body and what we are giving it to nourish it versus what we give it to numb up or check out or dissociate, all those unhealthy coping mechanisms that we inflict upon the body. This can be a good time to look at what is really nourishing and maybe take some breaks or do some experimentation around the things that might not be.
Beautiful. I did a lot of rounds of the Whole30 during this time for me. Because I love the Whole30, my body feels great. And also I love Melissa Urban, the founder of the Whole30. Her approach to these kinds of cleanses is, I think, really grounded and loving and very much in like, this is not about starvation or, any of those more self-hate induced changes to our diet and to our bodies, but more about learning about the foods that love you back and what feels nourishing, and examining how you might use food and eating to numb and check out, and instead finding other ways to cope with those feelings instead of eating. So that was a big resource for me during this time, was the Whole30 and Melissa Urban's work. She also has a book called The Book of Boundaries, which is really helpful for this stage too.
Yes.
So shout out Melissa Urban. In closing, I want to read a quote and just to kind of give a little bit of a taste of what's coming. This is from page 89 in the book. So, what happens when we say no to the patriarchy? We have the time to create the space within ourselves to develop a new relationship with the masculine. Not the masculine voice that has been split off from the feminine for centuries, as many men in our culture have been, but a creative masculine figure that leads us to the Great Mother, where we can heal our split from our own feminine nature. When we say no to the patriarchy, we begin our descent into the spirit of the goddess, where the power and passion of the feminine has been dormant in the underworld, in exile for 5,000 years. And so next episode, we are going to go into that initiation and the descent to the goddess, which, if I may be biased, is my favorite stage. And I cannot wait to talk about it with you.
Such beautiful foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Keep people excited. Oh my gosh, this has been just such a beautiful journey and exploration. I feel like I've gone back through and revisited and reawakened all of the wounds in each of these stages and the ways that they're being activated right now in my life and all of the ways that I've grown in them. There's just so much that we've covered. Thank you for taking this journey with me yet again. It's been beautiful. Do you have anything else you want to share before we say goodbye for the day?
No, if you see yourself in here, great. Good job. You're doing it. You're doing it. And that's enough.
It's enough. You're
It's enough.
enough.
Mhm.
Well,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much, Emily. It's been amazing. I appreciate you. Thank you, everyone who has been along with us for this wild ride. I hope you take some time and space for you to sit with some of these things, to find some tools that resonate with you and put them to practice, and be gentle and patient with yourselves. Show yourself a lot of love. I can't wait to talk to you again. Until next time, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you want more resources on thriving in your life or want details on working with me, check out my website at internallyguidedleadership.com or follow me on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok at Internally Guided Coach. Be gentle with yourselves out there, and I'll talk to you next time.